Phyllis Vance had run the Millhaven Regional Invitational for 11 years, and she knew every face that came through the gymnasium doors. That was the part of the job she was proudest of. 11 years of rosters and weigh-ins and early mornings folding chairs. She could match a name to a handshake faster than most people could find their parking stub. So when Cal Rourke walked in at 7:15 with a duffel over one shoulder and his boy at his side, she recognized him before he'd cleared the entrance table. She told herself it didn't matter. It was 3 years ago. The coaching board had made the right call. She looked back down at her clipboard. The gym was already half full, parents settling into the bleachers, coaches marking brackets, the referees in their striped shirts testing the mat edges with the toes of their shoes. The Millhaven Regional drew 14 schools each year, and tonight the bracket was tight. Phyllis had been studying it since Tuesday. She knew which matchups would decide things. She knew who the favorite was. She had not known Cal Rourke's son would be competing. Walt Greer appeared at her elbow with 2 cups of coffee from the folding table near the doors. Walt had been scoring these tournaments since before Phyllis took over. A compact, quiet man who rarely offered opinions and gave them only when asked. He set 1 cup down beside her clipboard without a word. "When did Danny Rourke make the varsity bracket?" she said, keeping her voice low. Walt glanced at the entry sheet. Qualified 3rd in district. His coach at Callaway High listed him as the best technical wrestler he's seen in 12 years. His coach at Callaway. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that Cal Rourke had taught his boy to wrestle out of a garage on the east side of town, the same garage he'd retreated to 3 years ago when the board had voted him out of the regional coaching program. The vote had not been close. The word she'd used, in the meeting, was soft. She'd been thinking of his quiet manner in sessions, the way he spoke to the boys in a low register, rather than raising his voice, the way he never seemed to want the room's attention. She'd been thinking of the program's record that year, which had been middling. She'd been thinking of a dozen things that, standing here now with her coffee cooling and Cal Rourke settling into the corner chair across the gymnasium floor, she could not quite reassemble into the same certainty. She turned her attention to the bracket. Danny Rourke was in the 152-pound division. He was 17, lean through the shoulders, with his father's stillness. That was the first thing Phyllis noticed when the boy took the mat for his opening match. He did not bounce on his toes or shake out his hands or look at the crowd. He looked at his opponent, found his stance, and waited for the whistle, as if he had all the time in the world and none of it was wasted. The match lasted 4 minutes. Danny won by technical fall. Phyllis made a note on the bracket sheet, without letting herself think too hard about what she was writing. Between rounds, she watched Cal in the corner. He had a low folding stool, a white towel over one knee, a water bottle. When Danny came off the mat, he went straight to his father and crouched in front of him. And Cal talked, low, unhurried, his hands describing angles in the air between them. The boy listened the way boys listen when they trust completely, and have learned, over many early mornings, that what they're being told is worth carrying onto the mat. Walt Greer drifted back to the table during the second break. He didn't say anything. He watched the same corner Phyllis was watching. "He always like that?" she said finally. "Cal?" "Yeah," Walt said. "He was like that in '87 too." She didn't ask what he meant by '87. The quarterfinals were starting. Danny's second match was harder. His opponent was a returning district placer from the Riverside program. A thick-chested kid with a low center of gravity and good snap on his shots. The Riverside crowd was loud. The match went the full 6 minutes, 2 overtime periods, decided by a single exposure point Danny earned in the last 20 seconds by patience, holding his position, controlling the scramble, waiting for the window his father had apparently told him would come, because when it came, Danny was already moving. Phyllis caught herself leaning forward. She straightened up. In the corner after that match, Cal did something she hadn't expected. He didn't talk. He put a hand on the back of his son's neck, and Danny dropped his chin, and for a moment, they were just a father and a boy in a loud gymnasium with nothing between them. Then Cal said something very brief. 2 words, maybe 3, and Danny nodded once and stood up. The semifinals were a different kind of match. Danny's opponent was quicker than the Riverside kid, lighter on his feet, good at changing levels, the type who scores in scrambles and wins on energy. Twice he nearly turned Danny, and the Callaway parents in the bleachers made the sound parents make when a match tightens unexpectedly. But each time Danny regrouped with the same unhurried patience, broke the tie-up, reset, and found his base. In the corner after the second period, Cal said something and pointed once at the mat, and Danny nodded with the certainty of someone being reminded of a thing he already knew. The third period lasted 90 seconds. Danny won with 40 seconds to spare. His opponent's corner threw the towel before the referee could call it. A clean, decisive finish after a hard 3 periods. The kind of match that made the room go a little quiet with recognition. This wasn't luck. This was a boy who had been made into a wrestler by someone who knew how, and who had enough of his father in him to find it when the night got long. Phyllis found herself looking at the gymnasium walls. The Millhaven Regional decorated its host gym every year with photographs from its own history, past champions, past finals, the occasional action shot framed in gold. She had looked at these photographs for 11 years and never studied them. Tonight she did. The 1987 photograph was mounted on the east wall, high enough that you had to raise your eyes. Black and white, slightly faded, the way photographs from that era went when they'd spent decades in a gymnasium's ambient humidity. A team photograph, 8 young men in singlets, a trophy in the center. The caption was a paper strip fixed below the frame. Millhaven Regional Invitational, 1987 Open Division Champion. The young man holding the trophy in the center of the photograph was not smiling. He was looking directly at the camera with the same quality of stillness she had watched from across the gymnasium floor all evening. The same set of the jaw, the same patience in the eyes. Phyllis Vance set her clipboard down on the scorer's table. Walt Greer, without looking up from his own sheet, said, he was 22. Only man who ever pinned Coach Dalton in open competition. Dalton ran this tournament for 30 years and won it 4 times. Cal pinned him in the third period of the '87 final. He paused. Dalton used to say it was the best match he ever had. She looked at Walt. He was still not looking at her. Why didn't he say anything, she said. When the board voted, he never... No, Walt said. He didn't. She had no answer for that. She picked up her clipboard. The final was about to begin. Danny Rourke's opponent in the final was a senior from the Harrington program, a 2-time district champion named Corey Siebert, who had won 11 consecutive matches this season and whose coach had been talking about state since September. The Harrington section of the bleachers was full and loud. Siebert was the kind of young man a room responds to, confident, fast, physically gifted in the way that made it look easy, until suddenly, it wasn't. The match began, and it wasn't easy. Siebert got an early takedown, and the Harrington side responded. Phyllis could see the situation clearly. A point down, an aggressive opponent. A final that might be decided in the first 2 minutes, if the Harrington kid kept pressing. She watched Cal in the corner. He had both hands loose on his knees. He was watching the mat, not the crowd, not the scoreboard. He called out once, a single word, and Danny heard it. The next sequence lasted 45 seconds, and at the end of it, Siebert was on his back. The gymnasium went still, the way gymnasiums go still when something happens that nobody had fully expected, and everyone fully witnessed. The referee's hand went down once, twice, 3 times, and then it was over. For a moment, nobody moved. Siebert's coach stood. The Harrington bleachers found their voices and offered the kind of applause that means we saw something real. Parents in the Callaway section were standing, and some of the other coaches too, and the referees were shaking hands with each other in the automatic way of men who have just watched something they will mention later. Danny Rourke did not raise his fist. He got to his feet, and he turned, and he walked across the mat to the corner, and he put his forehead against his father's chest. That was all. Cal Rourke's hand came up and rested on the back of his son's head, and they stood like that for a moment in the center of a room full of noise, completely still, the way they must have stood in the garage on 100 early mornings, when the work was done and there was nothing left to say. Phyllis Vance picked up her clipboard and then set it back down. She thought about the words she had used in that meeting. Soft. She thought about the vote, which had not been close, and the look on Cal Rourke's face when she'd read the decision aloud. Not anger, not argument, just that same measured patience, like a man who had learned a long time ago to let rooms come to their own conclusions and wait. She thought about 11 years of running this tournament, and the 1987 photograph she had looked at 100 times, without ever reading the face in the center. She walked across the gymnasium floor. She had to move through the edge of the crowd, and several people stepped aside without knowing why, and by the time she reached the corner, Cal had straightened, and Danny had the tournament bracket sheet in his hand, reading something, and Walt Greer had appeared from the scorer's table and was shaking the boy's free hand. Cal looked at her when she stopped in front of him. That same directness, no performance in it. "Congratulations," she said. "Your son wrestled a beautiful final." "He did," Cal said. She had planned to say a number of other things, and standing in front of him, she understood that the number of things she had planned to say were not equal to what the evening required. She said the true thing instead. "I've been trying to remember," she said, "who it was that told me you were too soft for this. And I think it was me." Cal Rourke waited. "The head coaching position is open," she said. "It's been open for 2 years, as a matter of fact. We haven't found anyone we were happy with." She stopped. "I'd like you to consider it. On your terms." The gymnasium was still loud around them, coaches filing out, parents gathering coats, the referees rolling up the mat edges. Walt Greer was looking at the ceiling with an expression of studied neutrality. Danny had stopped reading the bracket sheet. Cal was quiet for a moment. He looked at his son. Danny shrugged in the way 17-year-olds shrug when they are trying very hard not to grin. "Let me think on it," Cal said. She nodded. She had expected that. She offered her hand, and he shook it, and she turned and walked back to the scorer's table through the thinning crowd, and she did not look at the 1987 photograph again because she already knew what she would see there. She began collecting her sheets. Walt appeared beside her. "For what it's worth," he said, "he'll take it." She kept stacking papers. "I know." "You could have led with the photograph." "Yes," she said, "I could have." She set the stack straight, "But I think I needed to say the other thing first." Walt picked up the 2 empty coffee cups and dropped them in the waste bin. 11 years, he said. "You've been running this thing for 11 years. I know. You never missed much." "No," Phyllis Vance said. She looked at the empty mat, the folded corner stool, the door where Cal and Danny Rourke had just walked out together into the winter night. "But I missed that." 6 weeks later, the Millhaven Regional Coaching Program announced the appointment of its new head coach. The notice went out by email to 14 member schools. It was a single paragraph, factual, no ceremony, the kind of notice that most people skimmed and deleted. Walt Greer printed it out and taped it to the gymnasium wall, directly below the 1987 photograph. Nobody took it down,